Hey everyone, this is Scott from StartMedia.com. We're talking about that AMP for WP plugin. So the AMP plugin, as I talked about in the last video, not an easy plugin, not even a little. It requires a lot of work, and your pages, while they will look the same, are going to have a very slimmed down experience. This plugin makes it a lot easier, especially if you're not a developer. There is a pro version. We'll be talking about the free version that you can just download straight from WordPress.org. When you install it, you'll be asked real quick if you want to do a basic setup or an advanced setup. Just click advanced, just so that we can see all the options, which we will be going into. So this may take a little bit. So grab a cup of coffee and we're going to jump right into it. So for your website type, you could choose what type of website you have. It supports blog, news, local business, e-commerce, or other. Since this is a store, kind of, on storefront, we will be checking it as a store because that's what we have. You could choose where you want AMP. You could choose to use your home page, your post pages, and archives. So these are the pages that you want to have an AMP ready version. If you have a home page that's just built with storefront and doesn't have a custom page assigned to it, just do that. If you built the pages in Gutenberg, Elementor, whatever, you have to then choose that specific page through the drop-down menu. So we're just going to select home page. Design and presentation. This is where you can choose to add your logo and your color scheme. This is a global color scheme that you can then add. What color do I want? I'm gonna choose this red. All right, so now I got a red. I wouldn't recommend choosing that red, but I chose it. And you can go ahead and you can actually view this in real time by going to your website's URL and clicking, putting !AMP at the end of it. Analytics and tracking, if you have Google Analytics, you could choose to add it here, and has support for a bunch of different providers. Really, I would use Google Analytics. I'm not really big on heavy amounts of tracking scripts personally, but for the marketers out there, you guys are why that feature exists. For the privacy settings, you could choose to enable a cookie notice bar and to be GDPR compliant. Since this is a staging site, I'm not going to turn it on, but for those of you who need to worry about GDPR compliance, enable those options. Under advertisements, if you have ads, you can then choose through a plethora of options that we will get into real quick. And then third-party compatibility allows you to enable some compatibility. So for instance, if you have Yoast SEO, make sure you check Yoast. This will make sure that the Yoast markup is added to the front page. And then for WooCommerce, if you have WooCommerce specifically, it does require the AMP WooCommerce Pro extension, which you have to go to their website and you buy $79.99 for a lifetime license. For a limited time license for 1 year updates. This will make your WooCommerce pages validate with AMP. I'd love to get me a review license for it, so I may do that here in the coming days, but I really think that that's quite useful if you're a store and wanting to be AMP ready. For most of you, you probably don't care all that much. But that's why we couldn't select it under the where do you want AMP, because the WooCommerce products require this plugin for it to validate. Now, we also have under recommended plugins, you can go ahead and choose a structured data plugin, the ads for WP, and the PWA for WP plugin. And this will install these plugins for you. I'm not going to do that because I don't need them. Then that's where we can start getting into the settings. The problem with the settings panel, of course, is there's so many options. And I mean, there are a ton of options. That's why the setup screen is so easy, because this page is not. Now, let's talk about these settings. So AMP support, it just allows you to declare what pages you need AMP support for. You can choose to enable for custom post types, but do not enable it for WooCommerce. This will break them entirely. The AMP takeover allows your whole site to be ready for AMP. I enabled this just so that we could see it easily. And it basically allows AMP to be ready all the time and available all the time. Now, we're going to start getting into some of the customization options now. Advertisements allow you to display your ads in a variety of places. You can also choose to optimize for viewability, and you can choose to add a sponsorship label for your ads. There are 6 ad positions below the header, footer, above the post contents, below the post content, below the title, and above the related posts that are added on the AMP pages. For SEO, you can go ahead and choose to either use your SEO plugin like Yoast, or you can add the markup here as needed. And advanced indexation allows you to modify paginated posts from indexing. Really just use your SEO plugins to integrate their options. For your page builder, there is a page builder in this plugin because it is 2020 and every plugin and every theme has its own page builder. We are really going to love this. It's actually pretty decent though for building at least unique page layouts with AMP because there's not really a lot of other plugins that do that. PWA support, you have to activate the module for progressive web apps. We covered super PWA in another video, so we're going to just ignore this for now. Performance allows you to minify your assets. You can choose to add leverage browser caching and optimize the CSS, which is a beta feature. As it mentions, it will improve the size of the CSS on page speed with a tree shaking feature. For those of you who used a little known plugin as the AMP plugin for WordPress, this is exactly the exact same functionality. It will shake all of your CSS to try and make it as minimal as possible so that way it validates. Because with AMP, you can't have a very large amount of CSS. If you do, it will not validate. That's why there was an AMP usage meter in the AMP plugin, CSS usage meter, because you can only load so much CSS or the page will no longer be valid for AMP, and that's just to keep the page lightweight for performance reasons. Under your analytics section, this is where all you marketers can just really go to town with adding analytics scripts. Please only use like a couple at the most. Maybe Facebook Pixel if you have Facebook ads. If you're not running Facebook ads, you don't need Facebook Pixel. And Google Analytics because everybody uses Google Analytics and it's all you really need for most websites. Also, CallRail is enabled on here. It's all the way at the bottom, but that's one that I do get asked about quite a bit. Structured data. So the new update available for structured data, you can upgrade it for free. What? Upgrade for free? It just allows you to add schema markup. It's that add-on plugin that it wanted us to use on the setup screen. Can't believe I clicked it because now it's going to install. Okay. Here, we'll just go to the structured data settings because it wanted to show me. You click this and it warps you to the structured data plugin. This allows you to modify your structured data output. You can add specific schema types, knowledge graph data, specifically for AMP, and adding breadcrumbs, comment markup, etc. The good thing about this is it's fairly easy to add. You can also enable Google Reviews section, but you will need your Google Places API key. This is a good thing to add if you are a business and you have a Google My Business listing. However, most of you probably are already using this plugin, and your standard SEO plugin should take care of most of the schema that you actually need to worry about. The issue with this plugin in particular is it's quite difficult to set up. It will take time. We're not going to set up this plugin entirely because it would take too much time for me to go through and walk through all the settings, but I will do it in another video. But it does have integration with this plugin for those of you who are using it. We're going to just now go back to our settings and scroll on down. The notice bar and the GDPR compliance, you need to check these if you need GDPR compliance. If you do not, you do not need to worry about it. Push notifications, you could choose to add a push notification. Please don't use this for something dumb like new articles. There are so many people who do this now. So One Signal is a free one, and that's what I would recommend doing. And you could just choose to show your subscribe button either below or above your content, but please don't use this to spam people. People are now way beyond tired of push notifications because ever since they became popular, every website adds it. There are some websites that will now send me every day that they're having a 70% off sale, and it's just a link to their clearance section. And I honestly couldn't tell you the last time I shopped with them. I'm not going to call out any brands, but wow, is it annoying. Contact form. This will allow you to enable contact form compatibility. It will work with Gravity Forms, Contact Form 7, and Ninja Forms. The Jetpack forms, I believe, do support AMP, but do not quote me on that. I believe they do support AMP, so you don't need compatibility out of the box. But as I mentioned here, when you install this, you need to either make sure that you have the Gravity Forms extension or the Contact Form 7 extension or whatever. Unfortunately, these are all premium. And now we're going to get into the development versus cost. This plugin has a lot of great features that'll work out of the box, but to get those premium bits of functionality like contact forms, you have to pay for them. and that just kind of makes sense. You can upgrade to Pro, which I believe is their packaged membership deal. It'll get you access to all of them, and of course, at less than $10 per extension to themes on average, blah, 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 blah. It'll give you access to all their add-ons, and their pricing isn't actually all that bad. For one website, it's $149 a year. That seems reasonable. If you're an agency, you can get it for $4.99 a year. The problem is I don't have enough websites that would really need AMP for me to justify it, and frankly, I don't like the way their AMP setup looks for most websites, but it's an option. The pricing seems fair to me, though. That seems like a reasonable amount for this functionality because there's a lot of development work that goes into it. For the comments section, you can choose to display it on posts, pages, disable it on pages, obviously. For WordPress comments, you can choose to show X a number of comments, to use the no-follow button and your avatar. If you want to use a different comments form, you can enable it here. If you want to use discuss, you got to add your name and host AMP for WP, host on AMP for WP API. Or if you disable it, as it mentions here, use AMP for WP secure servers to serve the comments file. Recommended if your site is not on HTTPS. If you're not, then you can actually enable it you can enable it on your own host, and there is a documentation on how to host it locally. But for the rest of them, it's just, you slap in whatever detail you need. The Facebook comments work out of the box because it's Facebook comments. Vucal, which I've never even heard of, and spot.im, you can add their API keys here. Now, instant articles. For those of you who are unsure, instant articles are a Facebook-specific service, and they are terrible. And I mean that quite honestly. Facebook instant articles were basically Facebook's response to AMP, where you can now serve a specific version directly to Facebook. And it's whenever you click a post in Facebook and they had that little lightning article, and they worked for a little while. And then they stopped working because everybody stopped using them, quite frankly. Instant articles was a great idea in principle, but when it came to application, nobody bothered with it because Facebook dropped the ball on the integration. And Facebook also dropped the ball on the monetization. Because while news publishers do care about their articles being fast loading to increase their click-through rate, they saw a substantial reduction in their advertisement revenue. And there's no point in sending users to just a faster page, which they'll probably wait for anyways, and lose more money on every click. They literally ran the cost benefit, and it was better for them to serve a slower page without the instant article feature than it was to serve the instant articles because they were losing money. It's quite funny. But instant articles were okay in principle, but if you want to, you can integrate it here. I'll actually go over how to integrate it too. There is a WordPress plugin to integrate them specifically for the website. I'll show you how to set it up in another video, but wow, Facebook articles, I was on board for them for a month, but then it became a pain. The setup process was hard, and Facebook was really useless at getting it integrated. That was their own fault. For tools, you could choose to hide the AMP bulk tools. Frankly, hide, but you can enable individual AMP page bulk edit changes will overwrite the previous settings. You don't really need to mess with this for anything. Under the advanced settings, you can now do a couple of things. You could choose to do a mobile redirection. That means if somebody goes to your website on mobile, let's say you just shared your post on Facebook, it will automatically redirect mobile users to the AMP version. You can also do it for tablets, but tablets tend to have at least a little bit of a beefier CPU, so I would just use the mobile redirection. Search result page in AMP. So as I mentioned here, disable this option if you want your search pages in non-AMP. So when somebody uses your search box on your website, this will allow the search box query to return as a non-AMP URL. That's ideal. Change internal links to AMP. Enable this if you want all your internal links inside the article to /AMP. All the outbound links will remain untouched. You probably don't need to do that if you're using the mobile redirection, as we mentioned up here. You can choose to hide your AMP version, which is kind of a silly thing, but enable if you want to hide the AMP version in your view source. It's the page generator tag. That's fine, I guess. This will not invalidate your markup. The category description, you can choose to enable or disable. If you have text on there, it's always beneficial to show it because there is some SEO value in it. Smooth scrolling for links. As I mentioned here, enable this option if you want smooth scrolling for jumping links. you don't really need to worry about this. Change endpoint to $AMP. Making endpoints to $AMP will help you get to the AMP in tricky setups with taxonomies and post types. It's totally fine to leave it on or off. It shouldn't matter for most well-developed websites. You could just add a prefetch request right here, or to do a DNS prefetch, a preload, or pre-connect. You won't really need to do that for AMP pages. You could just auto add AMP and menu URL. So automatically add, as mentioned here, AMP at the end of a menu URL. That's probably fine for mobile users. Let's see, I scrolled way too far. The category base remove in AMP doesn't matter. I wouldn't do it. Same thing with tags. Wouldn't do it. The featured image from custom fields. If you have a custom field, it's from ACF and you want to include the field type here for your featured image to be fetched, enable it here. Featured image from the content, it'll extract the featured image if it finds one in your content. So let's say you don't use the featured image module, but you manually add your image in your post. This will fetch it and use that as the featured image. You can choose to show a featured image if already present in the content. As mentioned here, basically what this will do is say you didn't have the featured image, but you enable the above option to extract that featured image from your first image in your post. You could choose to show the featured image if that image is already present. I don't recommend doing that, primarily because what will happen is if you use that and you set the featured image to the first image, if you choose to show it, you'll have that big featured image at the top, and then it'll show that image underneath it. It would look quite ugly. I just wouldn't recommend doing it. You can set up a fallback image. That's always a good thing to do. I always recommend having a fallback image if there is none at all present. You can choose to enable Retina images. Retina image resolution, you can set it here. For most websites, don't bother. Retina images is not a really good thing to do. You can enable it for Apple devices. Most screens are just fine running on normal images. Retina is just a fancy word for a higher resolution display, quite honestly. My resolution on my monitor is technically 5K, but it's really 2K because of which is just it's in between 1080p and 4K resolution because of the vertical of my monitor. But my monitor is extremely wide, so it's 5K, but it's really 2K. And even then, my images on my website are 1080p, and that's sufficient because a higher resolution display, especially one as wide as my display, we tend to just use multiple tabs simultaneously. In all honesty, Retina images aren't worth the headache. So long as your images aren't grainy because you either over-optimize them or they just got messed up on resizing, you'll be fine. I wouldn't really bother with the Retina images. Dev mode and AMP, you don't need to worry about this. You don't really need to worry about any of the other options too. They're mostly just for debugging. The e-commerce settings, as we mentioned, here's something though. If you have EDD, they do have an extension for that. Easy Digital Downloads, great plugin. I should cover it. WooCommerce, as I mentioned, if you want it, you have to pay for their add-on to get AMP compatibility. The translation panel allows you to basically just change the text of some of the default text that'll work. So 404, it says, oops, that page can't be found. And that's actually what happens if you go to a 404 on here. Oops, that page can't be found. That's exactly what the 404 page says. You can basically just modify the output of the text, and that is sufficient. You can also choose to use the pot file method if you want to, but I would just rename it in the admin panel. It's so much easier for you to manage. Now we get to the design. So when I covered the AMP plugin, you had the transitional mode, which, as I mentioned, was basically a really ugly and basic design. It was basically just a blue bar in your text. This plugin works on the exact same principle. It uses its own templates, and it does have a builder that then allow you to design your pages. Now, you have to choose a template and a layout to kind of make your site look good. Swift is their free one. You have Design 1, which is really old school and ugly. Design 2, which is even uglier. Design 3, which actually does look pretty good. I would say Design 3 would work quite well for most magazine sites. And Swift, which is obviously their newest one. You can choose to, if you have the Pro version, everything in this video is going to be prefaced with, if you have the Pro version, you can choose to get a AMP layout. And these AMP layouts are very good if you're trying to customize your site, especially if you're a small business or you're just a service in general, you have a business-to-business service and you want to sell it, this will give you kind of like that head start to getting a nice homepage layout. And you can view the themes just by clicking on them. It'll take you directly to them, and you can just get the demo or download the theme right here. It will require the AMP Layouts plugin. But of course, this theme is bundled with AMP Layouts, which then means you must pay for the AMP Layouts, or you just pay for the Pro and get the entire library. That's where these guys get you. It's a really good business model, I would say, though. But as I mentioned here, just launched the AMP Design Library, which gives you AMP blocks. We're going to go way past that, though, because we could just sit here looking forever looking at the themes. Under the design, you have your global options, which allow you to modify color schemes, typography, and just general layout functionality. You can also enable icon libraries such as Font Awesome and just CSS icons. Swift Icons is their proprietary one. Font Awesome is what you're probably going to be used to. I would actually recommend swapping it to it. You also get a lot more icons than you do in the Swift one. General, you could choose to enable a sidebar. Keep in mind, though, if you enable a sidebar, it's basically going to be shoved at the bottom like it usually is with responsive design. Personally, that's the one design trend I hate the most about responsive design is the sidebar is basically worthless. It's almost always better to just remove it on mobile devices because nobody cares about your random post at the end of your sidebar when it's underneath your comments section in your related post section on your desktop, on your blog post for mobile devices. If you need to modify anything in here, though, you can easily do so. If you want to use Google Fonts, you have to use the Google Font API key. But otherwise, you can disable it. For the header section, you can modify what your header type is. There are 3 free options. You get the off canvas button and your search icon. You could choose to move both to the right-hand side of the screen, or you could choose to have menu logo button instead of the search icon. All of those are fine. For the navigation menu, you can modify some of the stylings of it. You could choose to enable drop-down support, which basically means you see how like it says news right here and there's a drop-down arrow that enables support for that. You could choose to have a menu search. The menu search will add the search icon, obviously, into the navigation menu. My one stance on that is if you are going to have that, then you don't need it in your header. So if you are going to have it in the search, which I think is best, go ahead and use the second option. So that way you have a button as a call to action that'll be more useful to your users. And if you are using the WooCommerce extension, I believe it also has an option for the WooCommerce cart in your header. Outside of that, you can modify your text. You could choose to modify the call to action button, and you could choose to show a non-AMP link in the header. You can choose to have a sticky header, even in the AMP, so as it works right now. And for those of you who don't know, a sticky header just means it'll follow you down the page as opposed to just being stuck in the position that it always was. You click on your post and you scroll down and it's there. We're going to get to the social sharing, which is the one thing I really want to change. For the homepage, you can, so if you're not using the AMP builder, the homepage will kind of have a default layout. You could choose to have a post types in a loop to just fetch all posts. This will start with the latest post, or you could choose to just do a category. You could choose to do an excerpt. An excerpt on small screens can also be enabled. This is just standard stuff. You don't need to modify it too much. For the single, you could choose to modify the single design. Again, free version, you get 2 things. You get the one option which doesn't have the sidebar and the option that has the sidebar. Personally, and in my opinion, the one without the sidebar just looks better. Because the sidebar looks quite ugly in this design, but if you're going for full AMP all the time, you're probably going to want the sidebar. That being said, under the single elements, you can modify the size of your featured image. Just use full screen if you're going to go with desktop. If you're going with mobile, you can just choose to image fit above the content or just set it to like medium large, and that'll cover tablets and mobile users. Breadcrumbs, you can choose to put the post title on your breadcrumb trail. If you're not sure what breadcrumbs are just a handy dandy little amount of text that shows up there. Because I enabled that sticky header, though, it's hiding it. That's probably a bug on their part. But we'll turn off sticky header just so we can see it and I can show you guys what breadcrumbs are. Breadcrumbs right here, homepage, and this is your category. This is an uncategorized post, as we can see, so it goes to that position. Really, though, most of these are just turning on and off various things to show the next previous post, the related post. Now, one thing that is great though is you do get to modify the related post section. Related posts are very important because it will obviously get you more clicks. This is the subscribe to updates button I was mentioning earlier. If you had the one signal API key in here, it would just go ahead and you click it and it would prompt them, hey, do you want to allow notifications? And you'll probably be like, not really, chief. And that is where you're going to be. You could choose to sort your related posts by tags or categories, or you can just do the following. Personally though, I recommend using the carousel because I just think it looks the best. If you're on AMP already, because of the news feed that AMP employs for the search engine, carousel just looks the best. You could choose to sort by tags and categories. For most of you, just use categories. If you want to do it by a tag, good luck, because most people who use tags tend to just stick one post or maybe two posts in the same tag, and then they forget about it and create a bunch of new tags with one post in them. You could choose to enable the excerpt for your related post section. You could choose to link to non-AMP pages, or you could just sort the post randomly. And then you could choose how many related posts. If you're doing the carousel, you can set them to a higher number than 3. I would set them to like 5. And then when they click the button to go to the next section, it would show it. The AMP is really the only time I recommend carousels, which is quite odd because I would probably use horizontal if I didn't want to show too many posts, but I do think the AMP carousel design looks quite attractive. The other thing is that AMP components tend to load even when they're not necessary, so it's probably already loading the carousel JS anyway, so you might as well enable it. Under the general settings, you can choose to have a lightbox for your images. You could choose to do video docking. For those of you who've been on YouTube, well, anyone who's been on YouTube and obviously watching this video, the video dock is when you click the video, and unless you go to the home page and it sticks at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and it just kind of sits there and plays the video and plays the audio. This has that similar functionality. It's a useful bit of functionality if you have a lot of video content. I wouldn't enable it though unless your website has a lot of video content. You can choose to enable a drop cap. Drop cap just means the first bit of text is a big letter and that text wraps around it. So like this one says social warfare, that S should be a drop cap and it'll be very large. It looks quite attractive. It's a design trend that's been around forever and it does look quite appealing. You could choose to modify the font sizes for various fonts. You shouldn't really need to modify this. Advanced single options, you could choose to put breadcrumbs, border, and underline on links. You don't really need to do this. The WordPress gallery, you can modify its layout. You can either use a carousel with thumbnails, which is a big image and the smaller images on the bottom, or a grid with a light box. No matter what you go with though, it's your own choice. The content sneak peek, basically just you click a button, it'll show you the full content. Totally sufficient. And if you want to enable a bunch of other stuff, you can pay for the premium stuff. Footer, we're not going to really mess around with this too much, but you can just modify the widgets in the footer. You're mostly going to put links down here anyways, and you'll get one footer type. Page, you could choose to enable or disable a bunch of options for pages. You shouldn't really need to mess with this because most of these options are going to be quite weird to show on pages anyway. Okay, now the important one, social sharing. So by default, it'll enable add this. Add this social share is quite hideous in my opinion. I'm not a fan of add this smart social sharing buttons. And I'm definitely not a fan of sticky social sharing because it takes up so much screen real estate. But what I would recommend doing is just checking on whichever ones you need to use. By default, if you're on full desktop, it'll show a single sidebar over here to the left with these share buttons. And then at the bottom, it shows the add this buttons. And then you got these buttons. Just show the ones that make the most sense for your market type. For instance, Facebook wasn't enabled by default, which made absolutely no sense to me. This Twitter button, for some reason, is missing its icon, but we're not going to worry about it too much. Only enable the ones that make sense. For instance, in the US, Line is not a very popular service, so I wouldn't really recommend using it. Neither is WhatsApp, quite honestly. Facebook Messenger, though, is pretty large. You need to enter a Facebook app ID, though, if you want to track anything. I would not enable the Facebook like button. But let's see, what do we have enabled? Pinterest, LinkedIn. I would enable Reddit, even though nobody shares anything to Reddit most of the time. And you'll click save. And these ugly buttons should disappear. And these social sharing buttons are right over here. Quite frankly, you could probably turn off the Facebook Messenger and be just fine if you really care about the styling. One note is that these icons are out of date. These are not the newest versions of the icon, and I do hope the developer fixes them because the brand icons should be up to date. The fact that they're not is kind of disappointing, but I think Reddit still is up to date, and I think the color scheme for Pinterest is slightly off, but I know for a fact that Facebook icon is old. And then you could choose to do a menu social profile. These are going to be follow links that appear in your off canvas menu. So we're going to click right here, and you're going to click here, and it's going to be your follow buttons here. Really, Google Plus is still an option? That should be removed. I would recommend that they remove the Google Plus button too. So you just enable whatever services you want somebody to follow on, and it'll add those buttons to your off canvas menu. You'll probably just stick these in your footer anyways, but you at least have the flexibility. Under the date section, you can modify how your date is showed. Personally, I'm a fan of showing the modified date because it makes the post look newer. So by showing when the post was last updated or modified, it looks a lot better. I'll actually be doing an article on that specific topic because modified date is a better indication of how green or new your content is instead of when it was published. I kind of wish it was the default, in fact, in WordPress. Miscellaneous. You can enable RTL support if you need it for your language and subcategories under a category. As it mentions here, display subcategories on your category pages. If you have a complex page layout where you need to have like cars, and then underneath cars you have SUVs, trucks, sedans, it will show those categories underneath the category page. Since this website doesn't have a lot of categories, I'm not going to bother with showing you, but it does look pretty sleek. One thing I would just keep in mind though is if you have the category text enabled, it could clutter up the top of the category header. So just keep that in mind. The extensions, as I kind of covered again, is basically, hey, we have all these awesome stuff. You can pay for them, or you can just get a subscription. This is the only time that I would actually recommend getting a subscription, is because if you need a lot of these, it's prohibitively expensive to buy each one individually. BBPress is supported too. I forgot to mention that because not a lot of people use BBPress, but it is supported. But keep in mind that while BBPress is supported, it does not feel all that much like BBPress, and there is no BuddyPress support because BuddyPress is infinitely more complicated. And then of course just upgrade to Pro. So now that we've kind of talked about this and the AMP plugin, we need to talk about who these are for. The AMP plugin is by WordPress.org. This is for sites and themes that already have AMP support, and you can just use them and it's not going to cause you any problems. The AMP for WP plugin, is going to be for your themes and your plugins that don't natively support it, and you don't have the money or the time to go ahead and try and make them ready for AMP. And quite honestly, as a dev, it can take a while to get things to work in AMP that didn't before. From a purely business perspective, if you're considering converting your website to AMP, at least even for mobile users, you might be better off looking at this plugin and just seeing if the style appeals to you. Because fundamentally, it's going to come down to the cost benefit of, if you want to have your dev try and convert everything and make it 100% the same using the AMP plugin, it may be more expensive. The advantage to this plugin is you can kind of, and I'm going to really stress kind of, get a similar design, but it's going to cost you less. And that's a decision you're going to have to make. If you want your design to be 100% the same, you're going to use the free AMP plugin, and you're going to have somebody work with your site to make it AMP ready. If your site's not that way and you really can't afford to pay a dev however much they quoted you to get your site 100% AMP ready with the same design and features intact, this is probably a better option for you. And that's just me being honest. We kind of touched everything there is to touch. If you do have any questions, you can, as always, please make sure to ask in the comments below, and I will try to help you out the best I can. I will try to get the pro version copy to review it as well, but otherwise make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.